The glow that should never have existed in the 1920s, America shone brightly. The streets filled with Ford cars, cities grew taller, and electricity illuminated shop windows late into the night. But in an unassuming workshop in the small town of Orange, New Jersey, another kind of light was being prepared. A silent, mesmerizing, almost magical light. A light that would become a symbol of hope, before transforming into a death sentence. Every morning, the young women working at the U.S. Radium Corporation walked through the factory gates with the same carefree spirit. Most of them were not yet 20. They laughed, called out to one another, and talked about their plans. An upcoming wedding, an apartment to share with friends, a salary that, for a woman at that time, represented a rare opportunity for independence. They came to paint luminous dials, those of military watches, aviation instruments, clocks destined to equip a nation proud of its modernity. Their work seemed simple: a fine brush, a tiny dial, a pot of paint in which a mesmerizing green glow shone. To refine the tip of the brush, they had been taught a quick and effective technique: lip pointing. They had to run the tip of the brush between their lips before each application to achieve perfect precision. They had been told it was safe. They had even been assured that radium was good for their health. Some used it like magic powder to sparkle at parties, tracing a fluorescent smile on their teeth that made the whole room laugh. But no one saw what this light concealed. No one imagined that at the very moment these young women refined their brushes with their lips, an invisible dust was penetrating their gums, their bones, their blood. No one perceived the threat that was slowly, methodically advancing through their living tissues. In the first few weeks, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then came the subtle, almost innocuous aches and pains, a toothache, unusual fatigue, a bruise that lingered. The factory floor continued to echo with the laughter of the women workers, but already, a silent countdown had begun. A countdown that, a few years later, would reveal one of the most tragic and forgotten scandals in American history. For in that small factory in Orange, without realizing it, these young women had just made a deadly pact with a substance that even scientists didn't yet fully understand. A substance they handled every day, sometimes even without gloves, and which glowed in the dark with the enthusiasm of an era fascinated by progress. This first chapter is merely the dawn of a truth poised to tear families apart, shake an entire industry, and drive a few women weakened, scarred, but determined to confront one of the most powerful industrial giants in the United States. The story begins in the light, but soon, it will plunge into darkness. The cracks beneath the glow at first, the pain was nothing more than a whisper. A toothache here, a stiff joint there, a strange heaviness in the legs after long shifts at the factory. The young women laughed it off, blaming long hours, poor sleep, or simply the stress of modern life. None of them imagined that something deeper, something irreversible had already begun carving its way through their bodies. Grace Fryer was among the first to notice that something was wrong. She was careful, disciplined, the kind of worker who rarely missed a day. But suddenly, she felt exhausted even before the morning whistle blew. Her jaw began to ache, a dull pressure that pulsed into her ear. Nights became restless, and each sunrise felt like a battle she had not yet recovered from. Still, she pushed through. After all, the glow-in-the-dark paint was said to be harmless, even healthy. Doctors called radium a miracle element. Why worry? Around her, the symptoms spread quietly from girl to girl. Molly Maggia, known for her laughter that filled the entire workshop, began losing her appetite. Soon her teeth felt loose. One afternoon, as she bit into a piece of bread, a tooth simply came out. The girls joked nervously, teeth falling out before 30. Impossible. Yet behind the jokes, fear began to grow like a shadow no one dared to name. The managers dismissed the concerns. They insisted the paint was safe, repeating the same rehearsed lines. It's harmless. Perfectly harmless. They said the girls must be catching colds, suffering from nerves, or simply imagining things. And the girls wanted to believe them. They needed the job, the wages, the pride of being part of America's shining future. But the cracks were widening. Molly's pain intensified. Ulcers formed along her gums and refused to heal. Her jaw swelled until speaking became difficult. When she finally visited a dentist, he was puzzled. He tried to extract a problem tooth, but instead of slipping out cleanly, a piece of her jawbone came with it. It crumbled like dry chalk in his fingers. The dentist froze. He had never seen anything like this. Meanwhile, back in the factory, the glowing dust continued to settle on the girls' skin, their clothes, their hair. They inhaled it, swallowed it, lived with it as casually as people breathe air. At night, some noticed that their bed sheets faintly shimmered in the dark. They thought it was funny, a secret glow, a harmless reminder of their hard work. But inside their bodies, the radium was taking root. It settled into their bones, where the body unable to tell the difference mistook it for calcium. And once locked inside, it released its hidden power, tearing cells apart from within, eating bone from the inside out. The symptoms grew, but the silence grew with them. The company denied everything. Doctors provided vague explanations. Families whispered in confusion. The girls were getting sick, but no one could say why. Not yet. This was only the beginning of a nightmare that would soon erupt into one of the most shocking courtroom battles in American industrial history. One that would change labor rights forever, but only after unimaginable suffering. The glow was no longer beautiful. It had become a warning. The silent collapse approximately equals 4,000 characters. Continuous voice over the days turned into weeks. And the quiet suffering of the dial painters deepened into something far darker. What began as simple aches now evolved into symptoms so alarming that even the most seasoned physicians were left baffled. The girls who once filled the workshop with energy and chatter were slowly fading one by one. Molly Magia's condition worsened faster than anyone could imagine. Her jawbone, weakened from within, began to rot. Pain radiated through her face, her throat, even her ears, until speaking became nearly impossible. Doctors tried treatment after treatment, insisting it must be a rare infection. Perhaps syphilis, a diagnosis that stained her reputation more than it explained her suffering. Her family protested, but the label stuck. The truth remained hidden behind shame and confusion. As the infection spread, Molly lost more than teeth. Her entire lower jaw disintegrated. When her physician attempted another examination, part of the bone detached in his hands, he stepped back, shaken, unable to ignore the horror unfolding before him. Still, he had no answer. No one did. Meanwhile, Grace Fryer, who had once been one of the healthiest at the factory, found herself unable to sit or stand without shooting pain in her spine. Her teeth loosened one after another. Weeks later, her hip began to collapse under her own weight. She limped to work, refusing to quit, unwilling to believe her youth could betray her so violently. Across town, other girls suffered the same strange decline. Anna, Catherine, Quinta, the symptoms were identical, as if all the women were living the same nightmare on different timelines. Tooth loss, bone pain, ulcers that refused to heal, fractures without cause, fatigue so intense they could barely get out of bed. Doctors continued offering contradictory explanations: anemia, arthritis, poor hygiene, female weakness, anything but the truth. And behind closed doors, the U.S. Radium Corporation clung to silence, protecting its image, its profits, its prestige. Management insisted the girls were exaggerating or falling ill from unrelated infections. Some supervisors even suggested the women were making themselves sick to avoid work. The company doctor, paid to reassure the workers, repeated the same words with mechanical calm: "There is no danger. The paint is perfectly safe." But the community could not ignore the growing number of funerals. In September 1922, at only 24 years old, Molly Magia died. The official cause listed on her death certificate was ulcerative stomach disease. Her family wept, knowing it was a lie. They had watched her body dissolve from the inside out. Something unnatural had destroyed her, but no one would dare name it. Yet even in death, Molly's suffering did not end. Her death raised whispers, then questions, then rumors. Who would be next? How many girls were already sick without knowing it? Why were so many symptoms identical? Why did they all work in the same room, paint the same glowing dials, lick the same brushes? Grace Fryer watched her friend's funeral and felt a cold dread settle inside her. She knew something was terribly wrong. She knew the company's reassurances no longer made sense, but she had no proof, no resources, no allies. Only a growing fear and a growing determination, because somewhere deep inside her weakening bones, a conviction had begun to form. The truth was hiding in the glow, and she would be the one to chase it into the light. The first deaths and the medical riddle in the winter of 1922, something unsettling began to ripple through the peaceful rhythm of the radium workshops. The laughter that once filled the painting tables grew quieter, replaced by hushed concerns about girls who suddenly stopped showing up for work. At first, no one connected the disappearances. Each case seemed isolated: a toothache here, a swollen jaw there, a strange fatigue that refused to go away. But beneath the surface, a silent pattern was forming. The first death that caught attention was that of Molly Magia, a young woman once known for her bright smile. Weeks after leaving the factory, her teeth began falling out one by one. Her jawbone softened until it crumbled at the touch. Doctors struggled to explain what was happening. Some blamed syphilis. Others thought it was an infection. None dared to imagine that the very substance the girls painted with won the world, celebrated as a miracle, might be killing them. After all, radium had been marketed as life-giving, an elixir of vitality. How could it possibly be the cause? But as more women suffered the same agonizing symptoms, the medical community could no longer look away. A strange, relentless disease was spreading, and it seemed to target only those who had spent years bending over glow-in-the-dark dials. Still, the true connection remained elusive. The industry insisted their product was safe. Managers dismissed growing concerns as rumors. Families were left with grief and unanswered questions. Then came Dr. Harrison Martland, the newly appointed medical examiner of Essex County, New Jersey, a man known for his sharp mind and refusal to bow to political pressure. When he examined the remains of several deceased dial painters, he discovered something extraordinary. Their bones emitted radiation. Their corpses, long buried, still glowed on his instruments. This should have been impossible. Radium was supposed to wash off. It was never meant to enter the body. Martland's findings shattered the illusion the industry fought to protect. He concluded that the girls had absorbed radium into their bones, where it behaved like calcium, silently destroying them from the inside out. It was an elegant explanation, but one that provoked immediate backlash. If Martland was right, it meant the factories had turned dozens of young women into the equivalent of walking radioactive time bombs. But a terrifying question lingered, one that Martland himself could not yet answer. If the dead were still radioactive, what was happening to the living? And worse, how many more were already beyond saving? The industry strikes back as Dr. Martland's findings began to circulate. The radium companies moved quickly, faster than the truth could spread. Their entire business model depended on the illusion of safety, and they would do anything to protect it. Behind closed boardroom doors, executives framed the growing crisis not as a tragedy, but as a public relations problem. Their first instinct was denial. The companies publicly insisted that radium was harmless in small quantities, repeating the same slogans that had fueled its popularity for years. Advertisements still portrayed radium as a symbol of progress. Tonics promised renewed energy. Creams claimed to rejuvenate the skin. If young women were falling ill, the companies argued it must be from something else. Poor hygiene, infections, even immorality. Anything but the glowing paint that had made their profits soar. Inside the factories, managers tightened their grip. Workers who complained were told they were imagining things, or worse, that they were jeopardizing their jobs by spreading fear. Some supervisors reminded the girls how lucky they were to have such prestigious work. After all, radium was expensive. Handling it was a privilege. Who would dare question the safety of something so valuable? Medical experts funded by the industry published articles dismissing Martland's research as flawed. Some claimed his tests were contaminated. Others argued that radiation inside the body was scientifically impossible. The companies hired private investigators to follow. Outspoken former workers, looking for anything that could discredit them. If a woman had ever missed a doctor's appointment, if she had ever complained of fatigue before joining the factory, it was turned into evidence that her illness had nothing to do with radium. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the industry applied enormous pressure on local governments. Factory owners were influential, employing hundreds and contributing significantly to local economies. Town officials hesitated to challenge them, afraid of losing jobs and tax revenue. The result was a wall of silence and invisible barrier that kept workers isolated and powerless. But the most disturbing tactic came in the form of deliberate misinformation. Internal memos, never meant to see the light of day, revealed that some executives already suspected radium was dangerous. Instead of warning the women, they chose to bury the evidence. They reduced safety standards, cut costs, and urged supervisors to maintain production at all costs. Every glowing clock that left the factory meant more money. Every sick girl was simply collateral damage. And yet, the truth had a way of leaking through the cracks. More women were falling ill. More families were asking questions. Dr. Martland refused to back down. The industry could stall, intimidate, and deny, but only for so long. Because somewhere in New Jersey, a young woman named Grace Fryer was preparing to do the unthinkable, take the radium giant to court. But could one sick, weakened woman stand against a corporation determined to protect itself at any cost? Grace Fryer takes the stand. Grace Fryer had always believed in fairness. She grew up in a modest New Jersey family that taught her one simple rule: when something is wrong, you speak up, even if your voice trembles, even if no one listens at first. But by 1927, Grace's voice barely existed at all. Her jaw was collapsing, her spine was deteriorating, and every step felt like dragging her bones through fire. The company doctors had brushed her aside. The supervisors had ignored her. The industry had silenced her. And still, she refused to disappear quietly. Grace began searching for a lawyer long before she could even stand without assistance. Most attorneys turned her down instantly. Fighting a radium corporation meant years of legal fees, scientific battles, and powerful adversaries. Worse, the companies were known for settling in silence or crushing cases before they even began. Too big, one lawyer told her. Too dangerous, said another. You won't live long enough to see the end of a trial, whispered a third. But Grace didn't stop. After months of refusals, she found someone willing to take the risk. Raymond Barry, a young, determined attorney with a fierce belief in justice. Barry listened, not just to her words, but to her pain. He understood the scale of the case. If he failed, it would destroy him financially and professionally. If he won, it would change everything. Together, they gathered testimonies from other sick workers, women who had once danced under the glow of radium dust, now unable to walk, chew, or lift a glass without trembling. Barry began building a case based not on emotion, but on undeniable scientific evidence. Martland's studies became the backbone. Medical records formed the skeleton. Grace and the other Radium Girls would provide the heart. On the day of the hearing, Grace insisted on appearing in court, even though she could barely sit upright. Reporters filled the room, some skeptical, some sympathetic, all curious. They had heard rumors of a dying girl challenging an empire. No one expected what happened next. As Grace rose to take the oath, her legs buckled. Her lawyer caught her arm, but she shook her head, determined to stand on her own. She tried again, and collapsed onto the chair. The room fell silent. Even the company's representatives shifted uncomfortably. The judge, moved by the sight, allowed her to testify seated. Grace's voice was thin, almost transparent, but her words carried weight. She described the factory floor, the laughter, the glowing dust that made their skin sparkle. She explained the lip pointing, the broken teeth, the spreading infections, and then she delivered the question that echoed across the courtroom. If the paint was safe, why are we dying? The company's lawyers countered with cold efficiency. They claimed the girls were exaggerating, misdiagnosed, or suffering from unrelated illnesses. They questioned their personal lives, their habits, even their morality. It was a strategy built on humiliation and doubt. But the courtroom had seen Grace struggle to stand. They had heard the tremor in her breath. And nothing, no argument, no accusation felt strong enough to bury that reality. Still, the industry fought back with every resource at its disposal. Delays were filed, hearings were scheduled, evidence contested. But Grace refused to let go. Her courage ignited a spark across the nation. Newspapers began calling the women the Radium Girls. Public outrage grew, and behind the scenes, Barry prepared for the decisive blow. Chapter 7. The Verdict of History. The trial of the Radium Girls became a national spectacle long before the verdict arrived. Newspapers printed daily updates. Photographers crowded the courthouse steps, capturing images of women in wheelchairs, wrapped in blankets, their bodies deteriorating under the silent poison that had once made them glow. For the corporations, the trial was an inconvenience. For the Radium Girls, it was their last chance to leave a mark on the world before they disappeared from it. Attorney Raymond Barry delivered a case built like a fortress. He presented Martland's autopsies, x-rays showing bones eaten from the inside, medical diagrams of radium accumulating in the skeleton like a parasite that refused to die. One defense attorney whispered, "If this is true, we're finished." But in court, they fought with every tactic available. Delays, appeals, motions to dismiss, questioning the women's character, anything to outlive the plaintiffs. The strategy was vicious and effective. Days became weeks. Hearings drifted into months. The women's bodies could not keep pace. Grace Fryer was now nearly immobile. Edna and Quinta, two of the other plaintiffs, could no longer speak clearly. Catherine Donahue, from the Illinois plant, weighed barely 70 pounds. The companies hoped time would turn the case into a funeral instead of a verdict. But something unexpected happened. The public turned. Editorials condemned the corporations. Scientists stepped forward. Churches organized vigils. Politicians demanded answers. By early 1928, the companies were no longer fighting just a courtroom battle, they were fighting the entire American conscience. Faced with overwhelming pressure, the U.S. Radium Corporation requested to negotiate. The trial paused. Behind closed doors, lawyers debated numbers, liability, and moral responsibility. The women sat in wheelchairs in the hallway, knowing every minute lost was another minute of pain. Finally, on June 4, 1928, an agreement was reached. Each woman would receive $10,000, a fortune for the year, along with $600 per year for life. Or rather, whatever remained of their lives. The company would cover all medical expenses. Most importantly, the corporation formally acknowledged the existence of radium necrosis, a recognition that would echo through science, industry, and law. The settlement was not a victory in the traditional sense. The women would never recover. They would never regain their strength or years stolen. But the case shattered the illusion of safety surrounding radium and forced the world to confront the cost of invisible technologies. After the agreement, journalists asked Grace Fryer whether she felt justice had been served. She smiled weakly, painfully, and said, "We didn't do this for ourselves. We did it for the ones who will come after." And she was right. The settlement sparked sweeping changes. Radium use was reevaluated. Industrial safety standards were rewritten. Compensation laws for occupational illnesses were strengthened across the country. What began as a local tragedy became a national turning point. But even as regulatory changes took shape, a darker question lingered beneath the victory. How many lives might have been saved? If the truth had been acknowledged sooner, the legacy that outlived the glow, the Radium Girls never lived to see the full scale of what they ignited. Their bodies weakened, their voices faded, but their legacy became the backbone of modern workplace safety in the United States. Before their story, factories operated like sealed worlds. Corporations decided what was safe, workers trusted them, and tragedies were written off as the price of progress. After the Radium Girls, the country could no longer pretend ignorance was protection. The first waves of reform arrived quietly. In the early 1930s, states began adopting new occupational regulations, forcing companies to monitor air quality, track exposure, and disclose the presence of toxic substances. Radium laboratories were required to shield equipment, provide protective gear, and forbid any form of the luminescent watch industry, once a glamorous symbol of modernity, was forced to transform or disappear. But the most significant impact came decades later, woven directly into the DNA of federal safety laws. When the Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) was created in 1971, its founding principles echoed the Radium Girls case: transparency, accountability, and the right of every worker to know the risks they face. OSHA's regulations on chemical hazards, exposure limits, protective equipment, and workplace monitoring were built on the lessons learned at a devastating human cost. Radium itself became a symbol of how innovation could turn deadly when handled carelessly. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, and later the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, established strict licensing requirements for radioactive materials. Radium use in consumer products was phased out. Disposal procedures were rewritten. Laboratories were reshaped around shielding, ventilation, and dosimetry badges, teeny devices that track exposure, a silent promise that no one would unknowingly absorb a lethal dose again. The Radium Girls' legacy also transformed medical science. Their autopsies revealed the long-term behavior of radioactive elements inside the human body. Researchers finally understood how certain isotopes lodge in bones, attacking marrow and tissue over decades. Their case became a foundational study in radiotoxicology, influencing everything from cancer treatments to nuclear industry safety standards. And yet, beyond laws and regulations, the most profound legacy was moral. For the first time in American industrial history, a group of ordinary working-class women forced an entire industry and a nation to confront a simple truth: workers' lives cannot be collateral damage. Their legal battle proved that even the most powerful corporations could be held accountable. Their suffering illuminated the hidden cost of unchecked innovation. Their courage showed that justice can grow from the smallest, quietest voices. Today, every safety briefing, every hazard label, every exposure limit chart, and every company required to disclose chemical risks carries a trace of their story. Most people don't know their names. They never see Grace Fryer's trembling hands or Catherine Donahue's fading smile, but they benefit from the protections these women fought for with the last years of their lives. More than a century later, one question still echoes through every workplace, every lab, every industry experimenting with new technologies. How do we make sure this never happens again? The faces behind the fallout, long after the courtrooms emptied and the factories shut their doors. The Radium Girls remain quietly, steadfastly etched into the landscapes of the towns where they once lived, worked, and died. Their legacy is more than laws or regulations. It is written into gravestones, family stories, and fading photographs kept in boxes under beds. And in these places, the story becomes personal again. Grace Fryer rests in Bloomfield Cemetery, New Jersey. Her gravestone is simple: no mention of the battle she fought, no hint of the national storm she helped unleash. Visitors sometimes leave small watches or glowing trinkets, symbols of the industry that both empowered and destroyed her. Her grave has become a quiet pilgrimage site for those who learn her story, a reminder that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers through pain. In Ottawa, Illinois, Catherine Donahue's grave tells a harder story. Her body, devastated by radium, was so radioactive that her coffin had to be sealed in lead. Her gravestone bears her married name, Catherine Donahue, and nothing more. But every year, students, historians, and locals place white flowers at her resting place. They say it is their way of returning what she lost: peace, dignity, recognition. Photographs of the Radium Girls survive in archives and family albums. Smiling young women in stylish 1920s dresses, hair curled, eyes bright. They look like factory workers heading out for an ordinary day. Most viewers never guessed that the clock faces they painted glowed brighter than the futures they were promised. Their portraits, some formal, some candid, are windows into lives interrupted, dreams cut short, and the hidden cost of industrial ambition. A few organizations have ensured their memory does not fade. The Illinois chapter of the National Women's History Project created scholarships in their names. Local museums host exhibitions retracing their lives, with artifacts like brushes, time cards, and safety manuals printed years too late. In Waterbury, Connecticut, a small historical display recounts the town's role in the drama, acknowledging both its pride in industry and its responsibility in tragedy. The most poignant memorial, however, is not carved in stone. It stands in Orange, New Jersey, a simple historical marker near the site of the old U.S. Radium Corporation plant. The plaque mentions the corporation, the painting studios, and the tragic toll of radium exposure. People walking by often stop, read, and fall silent. It is a momentary pause, a brief recognition of lives touched by invisible poison. But the true epilogue lies in the families who survived them. Many descendants speak of mothers, aunts, or great-grandmothers who never told their stories or could not. Some left journals filled with pain and perseverance. Others left only medical records and silence. The Radium Girls' story is no longer just theirs. It has become a generational memory, carried forward so that the truth is never buried again. A century later, their faces still stare back at us through photographs, unaware of the role they would play in reshaping American labor rights. They were never seeking fame, and they received none while they lived. But in death, their impact outshines the luminous paint that once marked their brushes. Today, when visitors stand before their graves, one thought returns again and again. They did not glow because of radium. They glow because they refuse to be forgotten. Before this story fades to black, there is something we must remember. The Radium Girls were not victims of a mysterious substance. They were victims of a system that valued profit over truth, silence over safety, and obedience over dignity. Their story is not a relic of the past. It is a warning for the future. Today, new miracle materials emerge every year. Nanoparticles, advanced polymers, artificial hormones, bioengineered compounds. Powerful AI-driven chemicals, each promises progress, speed, innovation. But behind every breakthrough lies a question we cannot ignore. Are we repeating the same mistakes? Every generation faces its own version of radium. A glowing promise, a hidden danger, a corporation certain that nothing can go wrong. The Radium Girls paid with their bones so that we would pause, question, and demand transparency before embracing the next miracle. So if this story moved you even a little, there is something you can do. Share their names. Share their fight. Share what happened in those quiet factories in New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut. Let their courage ripple outward, reaching people who still believe their struggles were forgotten. If you want more true stories untold, hidden, buried behind decades of silence, subscribe to the channel. It helps this kind of history stay alive and ensures these voices are never lost again. And before you click away, hold this one final question. If the Radium Girls had not spoken up, how many more would have been sacrificed in the dark? And an even harder one, who are the Radium Girls of our time, and will we recognize them before it's too late?